Hello everyone, this is Hugo Avila. I'm professor at Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana Iztapalapa in Mexico City. First, I would like to thank the organizers of the 4th International Electronic Conference on Sensors and Applications for having invited me to participate here. The info of this talk is related to some research projects that we are working on in order to develop solid oxide fuel cell prototypes and how some chemical sensors are needed to make sure that safety requirements are met during experiments. The title of this talk is Performance Evaluation of Microtubular Solid Oxide Fuel Cell Prototypes at a Laboratory Scale and Identification of Needs Related to Gas Sensors. The present contribution includes some results of the performance evaluation of microtubular solid oxide fuel cells that are in the process of failing due to the formation of fractures in them or in the cement sealant, so that researchers who are developing sensors could improve their prototypes for this type of applications. During such evaluation, safety relies on gas sensors that detect fuel leaks. A low-cost hydrogen gas detector alarm system was also developed and its design is also presented. Let's go directly to a brief explanation of how fuel cells work. Fuel cells are electrochemical devices for power generation by converting the chemical energy from fuels into electrical energy. As in any electrochemical cell, the main three components are the anode, the electrolyte, and the cathode. When using hydrogen as fuel and the electrolyte is an oxygen ion conductor, air is usually fed to the cathode chamber so that oxygen is reduced at the porous cathode. The produced oxygen ions migrate from cathode to the anode through the dense electrolyte. At the surface of the porous anode, oxygen ions react with hydrogen to produce water and electrons that are conducted through an external circuit from anode to cathode. Among the different types of fuel cells, solid oxide fuel cells are mainly used in stationary applications due to their high efficiencies and high operating temperatures. Such high efficiencies cause a lower environmental impact compared to that of conventional thermoelectric power generation. Other features of these devices, besides of the fact that all their components are solid oxides, are a noiseless operation, flexibility in the type of fuel that is utilized. They can work with hydrogen, methane, ethanol, and other hydrocarbons. And they could also be used as modules or stacks of cells in power generation systems as to meet the electrical power requirements. There are different architectures or designs for solid oxide fuel cells. Microtubular solid oxide fuel cells have been proposed for portable or mobile applications. Devices with this particular architecture have relatively small dimensions, length of tubes less than 10 centimeters, diameter less than 5 millimeters, and thickness of the cell components in the sub-micrometer range. Due to their small size, the temperature gradients in the stack could be relatively low, so that stacks of microtubular solid oxide fuel cells have greater tolerance to thermal cycling, high resistance to thermal shock, faster startup capability, besides higher volumetric power density and the ease of sealing compared to conventional tubular solid oxide fuel cells. Here's how our prototypes were fabricated based on a deep coating technique. Electrolytic and electrodic suspensions were prepared from commercial ceramic powders. Polymethyl methacrylate cylindrical rods were used as sacrificial cores. They were deep coated with the anodic suspension, drying alternately at 100 Celsius for 1 hour until a thickness of half millimeter was reached. Then an electrolyte layer was applied by deep coating. After drying, sintering at 1420 Celsius for 8 hours was performed. During this process, the sacrificial core was decomposed. The cathodic suspension was applied by brush painting and dried at room temperature for 24 hours. A final sintering was performed at 1150 Celsius for 2 hours. Silver wires were wound around the exposed cathodic and anodic parts, and silver paint was applied, thus forming the current collectors. Both sides of the cells were then connected into alumina tubes and a cement sealant was applied. A thermal treatment at 260 and 370 Celsius for 2 hours was carried out. Reduction of anode was performed at 500 Celsius for 2 hours with a flow of 5 mm per minute of hydrogen. During this process, the open circuit voltage of the cell was measured. Once the open circuit voltage is close to 1 volt and steady, linear swept voltammetry followed by electrochemical impedance spectroscopic measurements were performed. From linear swept voltammetry measurements, polarization curves were obtained. Electrochemical impedance spectroscopic measurements were made with an applied voltage signal with an amplitude of 10 millivolts in the range of frequency of 8 MHz to 1 MHz. Regarding the results from linear sweep voltammetry, the voltage of the cell is plotted as a function of the current density to obtain polarization curves. The open circuit voltage is located at the null current density. There could be a difference between the open circuit voltage and the theoretical voltage determined by the Nernst equation. As seen in this graph, the cell voltage decreases as the current density is increased, since part of the available chemical energy could be consumed in the different processes happening in the cell. There are regions where certain processes are limiting or controlling. At low current density values, the kinetics of the reactions occurring at the electrode surfaces contribute to the so-called activation polarization. At higher current density values, conduction of charge carriers is the limiting process so that an ohmic polarization is defined, and at relatively high current density values, the concentration polarization is significant. The diffusion of gas species at the electrodes becomes the limiting process. Thus, at any point, the transport and kinetic phenomena contribute to the loss in cell voltage. From the cell voltage versus the current density plot, the power density is estimated as the product of the current density times the cell voltage. Now, regarding the electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, in this technique, a sinusoidal voltage signal is applied to the sample, and as a result, a sinusoidal current signal is measured. The frequency of the voltage signal is varied, and the impedance is the parameter that relates the voltage and the current in this form. The impedance is a complex number. When the imaginary component of the measured impedance is plotted versus the real part, the spectrum in a Nyquist plot format is obtained. Ideally, a series of semicircles is obtained, and each of those semicircles can be ascribed to different components of the system. By impedance spectroscopy, signals of the electrolyte and the electrodes can be resolved or separated, and the total impedance of the sample, indicated now, could be read at the intercept of the spectrum with the horizontal axis, at the very right of the Nyquist plot. Now I will present some of the results of a microtubular solid oxide fuel cell prototype we have fabricated. Such a device had a length of 2 centimeters and an outer diameter of 1.5 millimeter. In this slide, some SEM images are shown from which the anode, electrolyte, and cathode thicknesses were estimated. Based on the SEM images, it is clear that the anode and cathode are porous. Porosity estimated from SEM images is in the 30 to 40% range, which is adequate for operation. And the electrolyte layer has no open porosity needed to prevent gas mixing. It is important to mention that after the thermal treatment for curing the sealant, air or nitrogen is passed through the prototypes and the flow is measured before and after the samples to ensure that the sealant has no leaks. Then, reduction of the anode is carried out. The open circuit voltage values of the prototype during reduction are shown in this figure. It is important to mention that when there are small leaks of hydrogen, the OCV value does not approximate to 1 volt. As anode reduction happens, OCV is gradually increased. For this sample, after the 2 hours of started the anode reduction at 500 Celsius, linear sweep voltammetry measurements were performed. On the polarization curves shown in this figure, the open circuit voltage is close to 1 volt. The maximum power density is about 300 milliwatts per square centimeter at a current density of 830 milliamps per square centimeter and a cell voltage of 0.38 volts. About 1 hour later, the open circuit voltage was decreased. Linear sweep voltammetry measurements were performed again. The values of all of the mentioned parameters shown in the previous slide significantly decreased. For instance, the open circuit voltage was 0.84 volts and the maximum power density was about 30 times smaller, giving a value of 9 milliwatt per square centimeter. The cause was that the sample fractured and hydrogen mixed directly with oxygen, and indeed, after cooling the furnace down and taking the prototype out of it, it showed a visible cross-sectional fracture. About the impedance of the sample, the impedance spectra in a Nyquist plot format are shown in this figure. Spectrum in red corresponds to sample in optimum conditions, and spectrum in blue to sample after fracture. Even though the shape of spectra is different compared to one another, the total impedance of the sample increased from about 600 ohms to 2500 ohms due to the fracture. As already shown, the results of the electrical measurements could indicate the propagation of fractures in sample, as well as the occurrence of hydrogen leaks. In this sense, results from linear sweep voltammetry and electrical impedance measurements could predict or be indicative of total failure in microtubular solid oxide fuel cells. Low open circuit voltage and low maximum power densities values indicate that hydrogen is mixed with oxygen. An increase of impedance of the samples at constant conditions could indicate propagation of fractures. However, safety related to hydrogen use during performance evaluation of prototypes at a laboratory scale should rely on monitoring systems with alarms. Sensors included in those systems should have high sensitivity and high selectivity for cases when gas mixtures are used, and the best would be to place them as close as possible to where fractures and leaks could happen, so that small size and tolerance to high temperature are also required, bearing in mind that intermediate temperature fuel cells operate in the 500 to 700 Celsius range. A low-cost hydrogen detecting system was developed. The hydrogen detecting system was composed of two MQ8 gas sensors connected to an Arduino Uno board with an expansion shield. The alarm module of the system included two RGB LEDs and one buzzer. The cost of this system is in the order of $45. Here's a picture of the tubular furnace together with our hydrogen detecting system. The two hydrogen sensors are placed close to the ends of the furnace, and at the center is the visual and auditory alarm. Zooming into the area where the hydrogen sensors are is where this picture comes from. Here we can see the quartz tube protruding out of the furnace and the sensor very close to it. The furnace has a quartz tube where the microtubular solid oxide fuel cell prototypes are placed. Samples are connected to aluminum tubes to let the fuel in. Of these three tubes, the one located at the center is for flowing the hydrogen, while the other two are for supporting the sample. Each gas sensor, showing dark blue here, was placed close to an end of the quartz tube. And the box containing the RGB LEDs, the buzzer, and the Arduino board was located at the center of the experimental setup. Regarding the code for the Arduino board, the structure of it is shown in this figure. Depending on the hydrogen concentration value that is read every 200 milliseconds, a certain color, either blue, yellow, or green, is displayed on the LED, and when red is displayed, the buzzer emits simultaneously an alarm sound. This happens when the concentration of hydrogen is higher to 500 ppm. Before use, gas sensors were calibrated with a flow of pure hydrogen. Now, regarding the technical data of the MQ8 gas sensor, here are the specs of it. It operates with a circuit voltage of around 5 volts. The using temperature is in the minus 110 Celsius to 50 Celsius, and the hydrogen concentration range that could be detected goes from 100 to 10,000 parts per million. This sensor is made of tin oxide and it contains also gold electrodes. Regarding the sensitivity, although it can operate with other gases such as LPG, methane, carbon monoxide, or alcohol, the best sensitivity values are for hydrogen. Although our hydrogen detecting system contains an MQ8 gas sensor, other sensors could be used. For instance, sensor MQ3 has a higher sensitivity to alcohol, and sensor MQ4 has a higher sensitivity to methane or natural gas. So our system works well with other types of sensors. In summary, a low-cost hydrogen detecting system was developed and is being used. It has the advantage that more than one sensor could be connected to it. And the type of sensor could be replaced so that gases different to hydrogen could be detected. The system has different alarm levels with a visual indicator, which is the RGB LEDs, and each alarm level corresponds to a specific concentration range. Also, an auditory alarm was included as the highest risk indicator. We would like to acknowledge funding by the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation of Mexico City and Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana Unidad Iztapalapa. We thank Dr. Patricia Castillo for the SEM work. César Ramos and Carlos Fernández are thankful to Consejo Nacional de Ciencia y Tecnología for the scholarship they received to pursue their PhD studies. I would also like to thank Carlos Fernández and César Ramos for helping me to prepare this video. We thank you very much for your interest and your attention.